Good morning, everyone. This is a bit of a weird topic. Let's get started. I'll be talking about Spring Boot through the .NET lens. Uh, so, why should we look beyond .NET? And if so, why did I select Java? Java is still the most dominant language in the enterprise space due to its maturity. Compared to .NET, Java started in 1995, if I recall, and .NET Core started in 2016. So it's a huge difference. And when we talk about Java, the most popular framework at this moment is Spring Boot. So let's get started with the project structure comparison. So when we take a look at .NET Core, the main entry point is the program.cs and the startup.cs. And in later versions, though, it was Stitch. The startup CS was Stitch after .NET 6, if I recall. But other things are the same. So the configuration is stored in app-settings.json, and dependency injection is done through iService collection interface. The build tool used is the MS build, while project metadata is stored in .csproj files. Similar in Spring Boot, it uses the Spring Boot application annotation within the class, which has the endpoint, and its main method would be invoked as the main endpoint. And configurations can be stored within the application.yaml or application.properties file, but I highly recommend you use .yaml format because it's more structured rather than the properties. For dependency injection, it uses provide the stream context and other annotations. As build tools, it has two, Maven and Gradle, but its metadata is stored in the form XML, like in CS plugin, ASP.NET Core. When it comes to the dependency injection, .NET provides a minimalist via registration through code using Fluent API. So services can be registered as scope, transit, or singleton, depending on its lifecycle within the program.cs itself. But in Spring Boot, it uses annotation-driven approach, which is offers a great flexibility as also it increases the complexity a bit because we might not see the services registered clearly in one place. That cannot see the services registered in one place. Also, in Spring Boot, service registration depends on the type of the service that we are registering. For example, component is used for generic components like utilities, and service annotation is used for business logic registration. This is purely for cosmetic reasons, and nothing differs with it internally. When we are looking at controllers and routing, as you can see, basically, rather than the syntax, everything seems similar. For example, in .NET, as you can see, we are annotating the class with API controller, but additionally, we must also inherit the controller base class as well. But in Spring Boot, we can simply use that just controller annotation. Rather than that, other things are mostly similar. As you can see, route and request mapping is the similar mapping that we use for mapping the controller, and we can use HTTP GET and at GET mapping for annotating endpoints within the controller. When we think about configuration and profiling, .NET uses JSON format while Spring uses YAML and .properties file. But when profiling, it uses similar approach within those files for differentiating environment configuration switching. So we can say both frameworks provide a robust way and a mostly similar way for managing configuration across environments. When it comes to persistence, though, they have a different approach. In .NET, we have EF Core, which is an ORM inbuilt, and it, but in Spring Boot, there's JPA. So JPA is a inheritance layer that is built on top of ORM. For example, by default, inherently it has Hibernate, but we can switch to another version if we may need. For migrations, however, EFCO itself provides a CLI tool, but in Spring we have to use Liquibase or Flyway like third-party tools to manage versions of the migrations. Or else we can simply use Hibernate if we are just using for development, but we cannot maintain versions. So we need those third-party libraries to maintain versions. So the repository pattern is a design pattern that is mostly used within development within our development, but .NET unfortunately do not provide us with an implementation for that. We have to use custom interfaces and custom implementations for that. But Spring Boot itself provides us CRUD repository and JP repository to facilitate those features. So when it comes to RMs, Spring seems like a bit easier compared to .NET because we do not need to do some boilerplate coding actually. So next, let's talk about middleware and filters. In .NET, the middleware pipeline is simple, actually. We can simply see it within the program.cf, and the pipeline runs depending on how we define it. We have defined it. But in Spring, that's not the case. There are three types of filters, middlewares and filters within it we can use. String filters, which are responsible for filtering request and response, and interceptors, which handle interceptors for method executions, and control advice for managing global exceptions. So for me, at the starting glance, .NET seems a bit easier for handling middlewares compared to Spring Boot, but it might be a case because I'm inexperienced in that case. For security, both of these frameworks support JWT or cookies and so on. But when implementing, I have encountered the Spring security is a bit harder to implement JWT. But if you're using auto form plugin, it's much simpler in Spring security compared to .NET. But if you're going with the JWT route, for me personally, ASP.NET Core is a bit easier. So these are the development tools that we use within these two frameworks. So for the CLIs in the .NET side, we have .NET CLI, and in Spring Boot, we have Spring Boot CLI for creating Spring Boot templates, and Maven and Gradle for building the project. And if you need a hot reload, we can use .NET Watch in the .NET side. And Spring Boot, we need to install Spring DevTools extension, dependency. For API documentation, we have Swashbuckle UI, and in Spring Boot, we can use Spring Doc. For IDEs, in .NET, without any question, if you have Kite for Windows, we could use Visual Studio, and have Kite found Rider as well. If you're using another operating system, and if you're using Spring Boot, it's no question. Please use IntelliJ IDEA. From my experience, it's the better choice out of anything I have used. For debugging, the IDEs I have used have robust debugging functionalities. Next comes testing. So in the .NET side, for unit testing, we can use XUnit, NUnit, NSTest, and for integration testing, we can use test server and web application factory. For mocking, we can use MOQ. Similarly, in Spring Boot, we have JUnit for unit testing, and integration, we have Spring Boot test, and for mocking, we have Mockito. When it comes to hosting and deployment, .NET has inbuilt Kestrel server, and Spring Boot similarly has Tomcat. Both of these frameworks support cross-platform support, so hosting won't be an issue if you are using Windows or Linux. And so we can use any of the web services to deploy these services. But specifically, if you are using IIS, you will be linked for .NET, and if you are using Tomcat, you will be linked for Spring Boot. As a summary, if we come analyze these two frameworks, it has a unified vision. So both frameworks prioritize building robust APIs while keeping the core principles like dependency injection, routing, and configuration aligned closely. The key difference that I only see within these two frameworks is uh, development tooling, syntax, and ecosystem conventions. If we can overcome these things, a developer would be easily be able to develop uh, using these two frameworks without any issue. Uh, so, what to choose and when to choose it? If you are using Azure, I would strongly recommend Docker because Azure is a Microsoft maintained service, cloud service. So .NET also is maintained by Microsoft. So compatibility would be much better in .NET side if you are, rather than use Spring Boot. But if you already have a JVM centric environment, I would highly recommend using Spring Boot. So that's what I have prepared for this presentation. If you have any questions, you can ask, or else there's this minor POC application that I have developed. If you guys are interested, I can show a bit of it.